My sister broke the one rule. I had and almost unalived my family, then showed up at dinner with a glass of wine. When I asked why she won't stop, she said, "He's still breathing, isn't he?" That was 10 months ago. Today, she was screaming my name through the Ring camera, begging me to stop. My sister and I have always had an okay at best relationship. We never talked, but we never fought either. We never shared clothes, never talked about boys, never did anything like that. Whenever it was just us two, the air was filled with awkward silence, which neither of us cared enough to break. But that all changed when she turned 21, because the second she took her first sip of beer, everything changed. She went from drinking monthly to weekly to daily. It felt crushing seeing her delve deeper and deeper. And what was even worse was when she tried to drag me down with her. I never liked alcohol and wanted to stay away from it. But she bullied and coerced me into it. On her 22nd birthday, she gave me a bottle of water that was actually straight vodka. And when I spat it out and started coughing, I looked up to see her recording my reaction and laughing. I gave her one final chance after that. I told her if she tried to drag me into drinking again, I would cut her off. Well, a month later, it was her and her boyfriend's anniversary. They invited me out with them, and my sister promised not to ask me to drink with her. Of course, she lied. Throughout the whole night, she kept giving me extremely diluted drinks that I didn't even realize had alcohol in them. Some vodka, whiskey, even rum. I remember feeling a light buzz after my third drink, and the world started spinning. This was the first time I was intoxicated. I clung to her asking what was wrong with me, but she just laughed, and because she was tipsy herself, admitted what she had done. I don't remember the specifics. All I remember is being enraged. I called a cab on the spot, and once home, I sent her a voice note telling her I never want to see her again. What's even more insane is that she called me a week later, blaming me for ruining her party because everyone looked at her like she was an eye-hole after finding out why I left. I didn't even respond, just hung up. Life went on without her. I soon met the love of my life. We got engaged, got married. My sister wasn't invited, never even attempted to reach out. But then, coincidentally, when I was pregnant, she sent me a message. She said she saw my Facebook post about having a baby with my husband on one of her friends' accounts, and seeing it made her realize nothing is more important than family. She apologized and begged for another chance. I was very reluctant, but eventually agreed. We met up for coffee at a little brunch spot, and even though she was nice and apologetic, she still had 3 glasses of wine, which let me know she was still drinking regularly. I asked about it, and she said alcohol was a part of her life she never wishes to give up, but she did promise that if let her back into my life, she'd never drag me into drinking again. I thought long and hard about it, and I agreed. I wasn't sure what to expect, but everything actually went fine. She respected my boundaries, never asked me to drink, and never got more than tipsy in front of me. But then, last week, she came over to my house, and that was when I realized resuming contact with her was the worst thing I could have done. This was the first time I'd let her come over after my baby's birth. I had warned her that she wasn't allowed to go near the baby if she drank, and she told me that was no problem. I still had a bad gut feeling about it, but the last year gave me good reason to trust her, so I pushed my worries away. But then she came over with 2 bottles of wine. We all had a pleasant chat, and even my husband had a glass. I, however, did not drink. My sister almost finished the 2 entire bottles herself, and was quite hammered. Still, the evening was going okay, but then she asked to use the bathroom. I pointed her upstairs, and after waiting a few minutes, I went to check on her to make sure she wasn't getting sick. But when I went up, she wasn't in the bathroom. She was in our room, sitting on our bed, wasted out of her mind, holding my baby. The second she saw me, she panicked and quickly stood up to give him to me. But as she was standing up, she lost balance. She fell and dropped my baby. He fell on the floor. I screamed and went to check up on him. Thankfully, he hadn't fallen from a notable height. He was crying, but seemed to have no major injuries or anything, which I thank my lucky stars for. My sister got up and started apologizing, and I just called my husband. I told him to hold our baby and dragged my sisters downstairs and outside to speak to her. I told her that I had one rule. Under no circumstance could she get near the baby while drunk. And while drunk, she decided to hold him, then dropped him. She kept apologizing, but I called her a taxi home, saying I never wanted to speak to her again. That, however, turned out to be a mistake because, as it turned out, she had done more than just dropped my baby. She had fed him the remainder of her wine bottle, and he was currently upstairs throwing up while my husband was crying and calling the hospital. The next few hours were a blur of panic. The ambulance took us to the emergency room, where doctors confirmed alcohol poisoning in my infant son. They ran tests to check for other complications, while David and I paced the waiting room, terrified we might lose our baby because of my sister's reckless behavior. The medical staff worked efficiently, but their grave expressions did nothing to ease our fears as they monitored our son's vital signs and took blood samples. The hospital social worker interviewed us extensively, looking suspicious when we explained how our son had ingested alcohol. I could see in her eyes that she thought we might be covering something up. They started a mandatory child welfare investigation, making us feel like criminals when we were the victims. We had to answer the same questions repeatedly, describing the incident in excruciating detail while our baby received treatment in another room. I tried calling Megan repeatedly during this nightmare, but she wouldn't answer. Texts went unread, voicemails unheard. She had simply vanished after the ambulance took us away. David had made her leave our house, but we expected at least a call to check if Jackson was all right. Her complete disappearance only confirmed that deep down she knew the gravity of what she'd done. After an agonizing night at the hospital, the doctors finally told us Jackson would be okay. There was no permanent damage detected, though they warned us that even small amounts of alcohol could potentially cause developmental issues that might not be immediately apparent. We'd need to monitor him closely and bring him for follow-up appointments. The relief nearly buckled my knees, and David and I clung to each other, sobbing with gratitude that our son had escaped serious harm. When we brought Jackson home the next day, I was filled with equal parts relief and rage. My sister had endangered my child's life, and then disappeared without taking any responsibility. That afternoon, while Jackson napped under David's watchful eye, I drove to Megan's apartment, running on adrenaline and no sleep. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel as I rehearsed what I would say, determined to make her understand the consequences of her actions. I pounded on her door until her boyfriend Thomas answered, looking hungover and confused. He claimed Megan wasn't there and hadn't come home last night after visiting us. I showed him photos of Jackson in the hospital and explained what happened. The color drained from his face. His shock seemed genuine, suggesting Megan hadn't even told him what had transpired. She's been getting worse, he admitted, drinking more than ever. I've tried to help, but you make excuses for her. I finished his sentence. You're enabling her, and she almost killed my baby yesterday. The words came out sharp and clear, cutting through whatever defense he might have been preparing. He denied this, saying she'd been through tough times that I didn't understand. I lost it then, telling him exactly what I thought of both of them. Before leaving, I made it crystal clear. If either of them came near my family again, I'd have them arrested. His stammered apologies followed me down the hallway, but they meant nothing compared to my baby's safety. Back home, I found David holding Jackson, who was thankfully sleeping peacefully. We agreed immediately. My sister was permanently cut from our lives. We blocked her number, social media accounts, and email addresses. We installed a simple security camera at our front door. We documented everything that had happened for potential legal action if necessary. The decisions came easily. Our son's safety was non-negotiable. For a week, we focused solely on Jackson's recovery, taking turns monitoring him day and night. He seemed to be bouncing back well, showing no lasting effects from the ordeal. We were just starting to breathe easier when my phone exploded with messages from relatives. Megan had posted a tearful, clearly intoxicated video online, claiming I was keeping her from her nephew out of spite. She described herself as a loving aunt who made one tiny mistake and was now being cruelly punished. The video had prompted a flood of family members to contact me, demanding to know why I was being so harsh to my clearly remorseful sister. Some even suggested I was using this incident as an excuse to continue our long-standing feud, as though protecting my child was merely a vindictive act. I couldn't believe it. She had endangered my child's life, disappeared for a week, and then tried to paint herself as the victim. When I attempted to privately message key family members with the truth, I discovered Megan had preemptively told them that I was exaggerating, and that Jackson had just accidentally sipped from her glass. Several relatives were now convinced I was overreacting to punish my sister. Their willingness to believe her version of events, without even hearing mine, was deeply painful. revealing fault lines in our family I hadn't fully appreciated before. Yesterday, we received a formal-looking letter from Megan claiming she'd entered rehab, and her therapist recommended family healing as part of her recovery process. She wanted visitation rights with Jackson once she completed the program. David suggested we verify this sudden rehabilitation, so I called the facility she named. It didn't exist. I'm sitting here now looking at my beautiful baby boy sleeping in his crib, wondering how my own sister could first endanger his life, and then lie so blatantly to manipulate her way back into our lives. David wants to get a restraining order, but some family members are already calling us heartless for not giving her another chance. The division among our relatives has added another layer of stress to an already traumatic situation. Am I wrong to permanently cut my sister off after what she did? How do I protect my son from both her and the family members who seem blind to the danger she poses? I never imagined becoming a mother would mean defending my child from my own sister, but here we are. Every parenting book I read prepared me for sleepless nights and feeding challenges. None prepared me for having to shield my infant from someone who should have loved and protected him as family. The next day, I called Jordan, a friend who worked as a detective who had helped us with some minor issues in the past. I needed advice about restraining orders and what evidence we'd need. He came over during his lunch break and reviewed everything we had so far. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you," Jordan said, after looking at our documentation. "Getting a restraining order isn't impossible, but judges typically need more than one incident to establish a pattern of behavior." I showed him the fake rehab letter, the social media posts, and played the drunken video Megan had posted. His expression grew more serious with each piece of evidence. "Document everything," he advised. "Every text, every call, every social media post. Set up cameras if you can afford them. And most importantly, don't engage with her directly." After he left, I set up a separate email account just for documenting Megan's harassment. I forwarded all the messages from relatives, screenshots of her social media posts, and wrote a detailed account of what happened with Jackson while it was still fresh in my mind. David installed additional security cameras covering our backyard and driveway. That night, we got our first alert from the front door camera. I checked the footage expecting a package delivery or something innocent. Instead, I saw Megan stumbling up our walkway at 11:30 p.m., clearly intoxicated with a bouquet of flowers and a teddy bear. She rang the doorbell repeatedly, then sat on our porch for nearly 20 minutes before leaving the items with a note. David went out to retrieve them when she was gone. The note read, "I'm so sorry for the misunderstanding. Please let me see my nephew. He needs his auntie and his life. Love, Meg." The flowers wire of cigarette smoke and alcohol like she'd brought them straight from a bar. I added this incident to our documentation file and threw everything in the trash. The fact that she'd come to our home drunk just proved she hadn't changed at all. The next morning, I called our pediatrician to warn them that Megan might try to access Jackson's medical records. They added a note to his file requiring additional verification for any information requests. Later that day, I received a call from the pediatrician's office. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Stacy from Dr. Peterson's office. I wanted to let you know that someone claiming to be your sister called requesting copies of Jackson's records. Following your instructions, we declined to release any information." My blood ran cold. Did she say why she wanted them? She said she was helping you gather documentation for a specialist consultation. When we asked for the authorization form you supposedly signed, she hung up. I thanked Stacy for the call and immediately contacted Jordan again. He said this strengthened our case, but still wasn't quite enough for an emergency restraining order. He suggested we notify Jackson's future daycare about the situation. The following day, David and I visited Little Explorers Daycare, where we'd planned to enroll Jackson when I returned to work. As we explained our situation to the manager, Karma, her expression shifted from professional politeness to concern. "Actually," she said hesitantly, "someone matching your sister's description was here yesterday, asking about enrollment procedures. She said she was thinking of registering her nephew and wanted to tour the facility." The realization that Megan was tracking our movements so closely made me physically ill. We showed Karma a photo of Megan, and she confirmed it was the same person. We immediately decided against using that daycare and began researching home-based nanny options instead. That weekend, my mother called to invite us to Sunday dinner. "Dad and I miss you all so much," she said. "We promise Megan won't be there. We just want to see our grandson and talk through everything calmly." After discussing it with David, we cautiously agreed. This would be the first time my parents had seen Jackson since the incident. And despite everything, I didn't want to deprive them of a relationship with their grandson if Megan truly wouldn't be present. We arrived at my parents' house around 4 p.m. Mom greeted us with teary hugs, cooing over Jackson, who was awake and alert in his carrier. Dad gave David a firm handshake and kissed my cheek. Everything seemed normal as we settled in the living room, Jackson on a blanket for tummy time while Mom brought out coffee and cookies. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of my sister's laugh coming from the kitchen. My whole body tensed. "Who else is here?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Before Mom could respond, Megan walked in from the kitchen holding a glass of wine. "Surprise," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I thought we could finally talk things out." I didn't say a word. I simply picked up Jackson, grabbed the diaper bag, and walked straight to the door. I heard David behind me saying something to my parents about trust being broken, but I was already strapping Jackson into his car seat, my hands shaking with anger and betrayal. I drove home alone, while David stayed behind to confront my parents about their deception. When he returned an hour later, his expression was grim. "They admitted they set up the whole thing," he said, pacing our living room. "They thought if they could just get us all in the same room, we'd talk it out, and everything would be fixed." "Did they say anything else?" "Yeah, and you're not going to like it. Megan's been living with them for the past 3 weeks. Apparently, Thomas kicked her out after learning what she did to Jackson." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My parents had lied to our faces while harboring the person who had endangered their own grandson. The depth of their betrayal was incomprehensible to me. I cried that night for the family I thought I had, while David held me and promised we'd get through this together. The next morning, I sent a simple text to my parents. "We need space from all of you right now. Please respect that." Then I blocked their numbers. David did the same. We needed time to process this betrayal and figure out our next steps without the constant pressure from my family. For a few days, things were quiet. We settled into a routine with Jackson, who was thriving despite everything. I focused on enjoying my maternity leave with him, trying to put the Megan situation out of my mind as much as possible. David returned to work, though he called to check in more frequently than before. On Thursday, I decided to venture out to the grocery store with Jackson. It was our first trip out together that wasn't a doctor's appointment, and I was feeling confident as a new mom. I put Jackson in his carrier, which I placed securely in the shopping cart, and began making my way through the store. I was in the produce section selecting apples when I felt that unmistakable sensation of being watched. I turned to see Megan at the end of the aisle, pretending to examine a display of oranges while clearly tracking my movements. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away, acting as if she hadn't seen me. My heart raced. This couldn't be a coincidence. This was our local store, far from my parents' house where she was staying. She must have followed me here. I abandoned my half-filled cart and headed straight for the exit, clutching Jackson's carrier tightly. In the parking lot, I scanned for Megan but didn't see her. I quickly secured Jackson in the car and drove home, checking my rearview mirror constantly. Once home, I had a full-blown panic attack, my first ever. I couldn't catch my breath. My heart was racing, and I was convinced Megan was going to appear at any moment. I called David at work, barely able to speak coherently. He came home immediately to find me still shaking. Jackson, thankfully, napping peacefully in his bassinet. "We need legal help," David said once I'd calmed down. "This is stalking." The next day, we consulted with Jordan again, who agreed we needed to pursue a restraining order more aggressively. He reviewed our documentation and explained our options. For a restraining order, we typically need evidence of threats or harassment, he explained. Following you in a grocery store is concerning, but difficult to prove as intentional harassment. Courts generally want to see a pattern of behavior that would make a reasonable person fear for their safety. "So, there's nothing we can do?" David asked, frustration evident in his voice. "I didn't say that," Jordan replied. "Start documenting everything. Times, dates, locations, set up more cameras. If she keeps showing up where you are, that builds our case. And don't respond to any contact attempts. That can be used against you to argue the contact was welcome." We left Jordan's office with a plan. We would document meticulously, avoid all contact, and build our case. It wasn't the immediate solution we wanted, but it was something. Over the next week, Megan escalated her attempts to contact us. She created new email addresses to bypass our blocks, sent daily messages about her recovery journey, and left voicemails asking for just 5 minutes with Jackson. Each message started sympathetically enough, but inevitably included subtle guilt trips and manipulative language. "I know you're just trying to protect Jackson," one voicemail said, "but do you really want him growing up without knowing his aunt who loves him so much? Don't you remember how much you loved spending time with Aunt Patty when we were kids?" I saved everything without responding. With each message, her tone gradually shifted from pleading to demanding, from, "I understand why you're upset," to, "You're being unreasonable, and you can't keep him from me forever." 2 weeks after the grocery store incident, our newly hired nanny, Jessica, reported something disturbing. While taking Jackson for a walk in the neighborhood, she noticed the same car circling the block 3 times. She couldn't identify the driver, but the behavior was concerning enough that she cut the walk short and returned to our house. "I'm probably being paranoid," Jessica said, "but with everything you've told me about your sister, I didn't want to take any chances." We thanked her for her vigilance and decided to invest in a GPS tracking device for the stroller. It felt ridiculous. What parent has to track their baby stroller because of their own sibling? But we were taking no chances with Jackson's safety. The next day, I received a troubling call from Dakota, a mutual childhood friend who still had occasional contact with Megan. "I don't want to alarm you," Dakota said, "but Megan's been asking me some weird questions. She wanted to know what time you usually put the baby down for naps, and if you still keep a spare key under the planter like your parents used to." "What did you tell her?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nothing. I told her I hadn't been to your new house and wouldn't know that stuff. She claimed she wanted to leave a special surprise for Jackson, but something felt off about it. I thought, you should know." I thanked Dakota for the warning and immediately called a locksmith to change all our locks. We also changed our alarm codes and made sure every window was secured. That night, neither David nor I slept well, taking turns checking on Jackson and listening for any unusual sounds. Around 2 a.m., David nudged me awake. "There's a car parked across the street," he whispered. "It's been there for at least an hour." I peered through our bedroom blinds. Even in the darkness, I could make out the outline of Megan's distinctive hatchback. A figure sat in the driver's seat just watching our house. David pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt. "I'm going out there. Be careful," I warned, already reaching for my phone in case I needed to call 911. I watched from the window as David approached the car. The headlights suddenly switched on, temporarily, blinding him, but he continued forward. I could see him speaking to the driver, his posture tense and defensive. After a brief exchange, the car pulled away from the curb and drove off. It was her, David confirmed when he returned. She claimed she was just making sure we were safe. When I told her I was calling the police, she took off. The next morning, we took this new evidence to Jordan, who agreed we finally had enough for a temporary restraining order. We filed the paperwork that day, and the order was granted within hours. Megan was now legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of us, our home, or Jackson's doctor's office. For about a week, the restraining orders seemed to work. We didn't see Megan's car, receive any messages from unknown accounts, or notice anyone following us. We began to relax slightly, thinking perhaps the legal action had finally gotten through to her. Then, I discovered something horrifying. While checking Instagram one evening, I stumbled across a mommy blog account using photos of Jackson. The account was called Antum's Adventures and featured dozens of my Facebook photos of Jackson with captions like, "My precious nephew growing so fast," and "Can't wait for our next cuddle session." I dug deeper and found 3 more fake accounts across different platforms, all using stolen photos of my son and pretending to have a relationship with him. One even included fabricated stories about babysitting adventures and special auntie and nephew moments that never happened. I spent hours reporting these accounts and adjusting our privacy settings to lock down all our personal information. David contacted Jordan about this new development, but since Megan hadn't directly contacted us or approached us physically, the fake accounts didn't technically violate the restraining order. The stress was taking a toll on both of us. David suggested we start therapy to help deal with the constant anxiety and hypervigilance we were living with. We found a therapist specializing in family trauma and scheduled our first session for the following week. During that first therapy session with Dr. William, we took turns explaining the situation. From the initial incident with Jackson to the ongoing stalking behavior, Dr. William was validating and supportive, helping us understand that our reactions were normal given the circumstances. Halfway through the session, David's phone rang. He apologized and moved to silence it, but then saw it was our neighbor calling. He answered, listened for a moment, then his face went pale. "We need to go," he said, already standing. "Someone broke into our house. We rushed home to find 2 police officers in our driveway. Our neighbor had called 911 after noticing our side door standing open. The officers had cleared the house and found no one inside, but invited us to check if anything was missing. Everything in the living room and kitchen appeared untouched. Our electronics, jewelry, and other valuables were all in place. But when we reached Jackson's nursery, I stopped dead in my tracks. On the changing table sat a large gift basket wrapped in cellophane with a pink bow. Inside were baby clothes, toys, and a card signed with love from Auntie Megan. But something was wrong. I approached the basket cautiously and detected a strong smell of wine. When David carefully unwrapped it, we discovered all the baby clothes were soaked in red wine. The card inside read, "Since you won't let me see him, I thought I'd send something for him to remember me by. Blood is thicker than water, but wine leaves a stronger stain." The police documented everything and took the basket as evidence. They explained that since nothing was damaged or stolen and Megan had left before they arrived, they could only add this to our case file. The officer suggested we consider installing more security cameras and perhaps getting a dog as an additional deterrent. After they left, David and I sat on the couch in stunned silence. The violation of our home, specifically our baby's room, left me feeling violated and terrified. The wine-soaked clothes were a clear reference to the original incident and showed that Megan not only felt no remorse, but was actively taunting us about it. "We can't stay here," I finally said. "She knows where we live. She can get in anytime she wants, and the police can't do anything until after she's already done something." David agreed. "My parents have been asking us to visit. Maybe we could go stay with them for a while. They live in Lakeside. She wouldn't think to look for us there." The next day, we packed essentials for an extended stay, installed additional security cameras that would send alerts to our phones, and drove to David's parents' house in Lakeside. We didn't tell anyone where we were going, not even our close friends, fearing the information might somehow get back to Megan. David's parents, Michael and Barbara, welcomed us warmly, converting their home office into a temporary nursery for Jackson. They were horrified by our situation and promised to help however they could. Their house was in a quiet, gated community with good security, which gave us some peace of mind. For the first 3 days at his parents' house, I finally relaxed enough to sleep through the night. Being away from our home and the constant fear of Megan appearing gave me space to breathe. Jackson seemed to sense the change in atmosphere, too. He was smiling more and fussing less. On the 4th day, my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "Nice place. The garden looks peaceful." My blood ran cold. I showed David the message, and he immediately went outside to scan the neighborhood. There was no sign of Megan, but the message was clear. She had somehow found us again. Michael, David's father, was a retired security specialist who had worked for various corporations. When we showed him the text, he immediately went into professional mode, helping us secure the house further and coaching us on safety protocols. "No established routines," he advised. "Vary your schedules, the times you come and go, different routes if you drive anywhere, and absolutely no social media updates, not even private ones." We followed his advice religiously, but Megan still managed to extend her reach. She somehow obtained David's parents' phone numbers and began calling them with elaborate stories about me keeping her from her only nephew. When that didn't work, she moved on to his extended family, forcing us to have uncomfortable conversations with aunts, uncles, and cousins, explaining why a woman they'd never met was contacting them about our baby. Meanwhile, the court date for our permanent restraining order was approaching. We gathered all our evidence, the hospital records, police reports, photographs of the wine-soaked baby clothes, records of the fake social media accounts, and statements from witnesses like Dakota and Jessica. Jordan was confident we had a strong case. The day before the hearing, we received notice that Megan had hired her own attorney, a surprisingly high-profile lawyer known for aggressive tactics. How she afforded him, I had no idea, but his involvement raised the stakes significantly. In court, I presented our case as calmly and factually as I could, despite my nerves. I detailed how Megan had endangered Jackson by giving him alcohol, her subsequent stalking behavior, the break-in, and the ongoing harassment. Our documentation was thorough and well-organized, thanks to my obsessive record-keeping over the past weeks. Then Megan's lawyer stood up. He portrayed her as a struggling alcoholic who had made one terrible mistake and was being unfairly punished while trying to recover. He claimed I had a history of exaggerating Megan's behavior due to childhood jealousy, and that I was using this incident to permanently cut her off from family connections she desperately needed for her recovery. "My client has enrolled in rehabilitation, Your Honor," he said smoothly. "She acknowledges her grave error in judgment, but is actively seeking help. Permanently severing family ties through this order would be detrimental to her recovery and denies the possibility of supervised reconciliation in the future." The judge asked several pointed questions of both sides, then announced he would take a 30-day continuance to review all evidence before making a final decision. In the meantime, the temporary restraining order would remain in effect. We left the courthouse feeling deflated. We'd hoped for immediate resolution, but now faced another month of uncertainty. As we walked to our car, I spotted my mother standing near the courthouse steps. She approached cautiously, looking thinner and more tired than I remembered. "Can we talk?" she asked, "just for a minute?" David squeezed my hand, but stepped away to give us privacy. I crossed my arms defensively, not ready to forgive her betrayal. "Megan told us she's having suicidal thoughts," my mother said without preamble. "She says being cut off from family is killing her. Can't you drop this restraining order and let us work together as a family to help her?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom, she gave alcohol to my infant son. She broke into our house. She's stalking us, and you want me to just forgive and forget because she says she's suicidal?" My mother looked down. "We're just trying to help both our daughters. Is that so wrong?" "How did she find us at David's parents' house?" I asked suddenly, a suspicion forming. My mother's guilty expression confirmed my fears before she spoke. "I might have mentioned where you were staying. I didn't think it was a secret." The betrayal hit me all over again. My own mother had compromised our safety, all while trying to guilt me into dropping protections for my child. I took a deep breath, fighting back tears. "We're done here," I said quietly. "Don't contact us again until you decide which daughter's well-being you actually care about." I walked away, joining David at the car. As we drove back to his parents' house, I explained what had happened. We decided it was time to cut contact with my parents as well, at least temporarily. They had proven they couldn't be trusted with even basic information about our whereabouts. That evening, David's mother handed me a sealed envelope that had been dropped off while we were at court. "A young man delivered this," she explained. "He said it was important." Inside was a handwritten letter from Thomas, Megan's ex-boyfriend. He explained that he'd broken up with her after witnessing her obsession firsthand and wanted to warn us about her deteriorating mental state. "She talks about rescuing your baby all the time." He wrote, "She's drinking heavily again and has a whole wall covered with photos of him printed from your old social media. I'm truly scared for what she might do and thought you should know." We immediately provided this information to Jordan and the police, who finally began taking our concerns more seriously. Jordan filed an addendum to our restraining order request, including Thomas's letter as new evidence. The night before our rescheduled court date, the security system at David's parents' house triggered an alert. The cameras captured Megan, attempting to enter the backyard by scaling the fence. The alarm had activated automatically, sending her running before she could get fully over the fence. The footage clearly showed her face, giving us fresh, undeniable evidence of her violating the temporary order. In court the next morning, the judge reviewed both the original evidence and the new developments. This time, Megan appeared surprisingly composed. She wore a conservative dress, minimal makeup, and kept her eyes downcast in an appearance of contrition. Her attorney presented a new narrative. Megan had recognized her problems and was actively seeking treatment for alcohol addiction. He submitted paperwork from a treatment facility as evidence of her commitment to change. When given my chance to speak, I delivered an emotional but fact-based account of everything that had happened. I explained that while I wished my sister well in any genuine recovery effort, her repeated violations of boundaries and the escalating nature of her behavior made me fear for my family's safety. "Your Honor," I said, my voice catching despite my best efforts. "I wake up every night, checking that my baby is still breathing in his crib. I can't go to the grocery store without looking over my shoulder. My sister gave alcohol to my infant, broke into our home, and has now followed us to a different city. This isn't about punishment. It's about protection." The judge considered all the evidence, particularly the recent security footage showing Megan's attempt to enter David's parents' property. He granted the permanent restraining order immediately, ordering Megan to stay at least 1,000 FT away from me, David, Jackson, and any residence or workplace associated with us for a period of 3 years. We felt momentary relief as we left the courthouse, but it was short-lived. Within hours, Megan violated the order by sending an email from a new address. No piece of paper will keep me from what's mine. Blood doesn't smudge away with a judge's signature. We forwarded it immediately to the police in Jordan, who advised us that this violation could result in her arrest. Officers went to Megan's last known address to serve the restraining order and potentially arrest her for the immediate violation, but discovered she had vacated her apartment days earlier. What they found there was disturbing. According to the officer who called us, her apartment was filled with empty liquor bottles and a wall covered with printed photos of Jackson. Some taken from social media, others clearly photographed through windows or from a distance. There were also maps with our routines noted, including Jackson's usual nap times. And when David typically left for work, an alert was issued for Megan's apprehension, which only intensified our fear. Not knowing where she was, or when she might appear next, meant we couldn't let our guard down for a moment. We decided to remain at David's parents' house rather than return home, feeling at least somewhat safer with the gated community and additional security measures. 3 tense days passed with no sign of Megan. We began to hope that perhaps she'd left the area entirely, seeking a fresh start somewhere else. David even ventured back to our house briefly to collect more of our belongings, reporting that everything seemed untouched since we'd left. On the 4th day, Jessica took Jackson to the community park within the gated neighborhood. David's mother went along, giving me my first hour alone in weeks. I used the time to shower and actually blow-dry my hair. Small acts of self-care that had become luxuries in our constant state of vigilance. My phone rang just as I was finishing. It was Jessica, her voice tight with controlled panic. "I think I just saw your sister," she said, quietly. "There's a woman who's been following us around the park for the last 20 minutes. She's keeping her distance. But I recognize her from the photos you showed me." My heart raced. "Where are you now?" "Near the playground. Your mother-in-law is with Jackson on the swings." I stepped away to call you. "Stay with them," I instructed. "David will be there in 2 minutes. I'm calling the police." I hung up and immediately called David, who was working in his father's home office. He ran out the door without even ending the call. Then I dialed 911, explaining the situation and the active restraining order. They promised to dispatch officers immediately. Through the living room window, I saw David's car screeching out of the driveway. I paced anxiously, waiting for news. 5 minutes later, though it felt like hours, David called back. "We've got Jackson," he said, breathless. "We're coming home now." Jessica definitely saw Megan. She tried to run when I showed up, but the security guard stopped her at the gate. "Police are taking her into custody now." I collapsed onto the couch in relief. When they arrived home minutes later, I clutched Jackson to my chest, breathing in his baby scent and letting tears flow freely. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe we might actually be safe. Later that evening, an officer called to confirm that Megan had been arrested for violating the restraining order. She would be held pending a bail hearing, and given her history of violations, there was a good chance she would remain in custody, at least temporarily. We thanked the officers profusely for their quick response. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in what felt like months with Jackson's bassinet pulled close to our bed, and the knowledge that at least for now, Megan couldn't reach us. The next morning, we began serious discussions about our long-term plans. Did we want to return to our home eventually? Should we consider moving to a different city? How would we handle family events in the future, knowing my parents couldn't be trusted to maintain boundaries? We had more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. Our lives had been fundamentally changed by Megan's actions, and we would never again take our family's safety for granted. Whatever came next, whether Megan remained in custody or was released, we would face it together with our son's well-being as our only priority. "Do you think she'll ever understand what she did?" I asked David as we sat on his parents' porch that evening, watching the sunset while Jackson napped inside. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "But I do know it's not our job to help her understand. Our job is to protect our son, and that's exactly what we're going to do." I nodded, leaning against his shoulder. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since that horrible day when Megan had given alcohol to our baby, I felt like we might actually find our way through this nightmare. The bail hearing was set for the next morning, and David insisted on attending to make sure the judge understood the severity of the situation. His mom offered to stay with me and Jackson, which was a relief since I wasn't mentally ready to face Megan again so soon. When David returned a few hours later, his expression was a mix of relief and concern. "She got bail," he said, dropping onto the couch beside me. "But there are conditions. She has to wear an ankle monitor to track her movements, submit to weekly drug and alcohol testing, and stay at least 1,000 hours FT from us at all times." "How did she seem?" I asked, bouncing Jackson gently on my knee, oddly calm. Her lawyer did most of the talking. She just sat there staring straight ahead. The only time she showed any emotion was when they mentioned the alcohol monitoring. She actually argued with her lawyer about it. That didn't surprise me. Even with everything at stake, alcohol was still her priority. We decided to remain at David's parents' house a while longer, not quite trusting the monitoring system to keep us safe. Jackson seemed happy enough with the arrangement, thriving under the additional attention from his grandparents. 2 weeks later, we received a call from Jordan. He'd been keeping tabs on Megan's case and had news. They did a full substance abuse evaluation as part of her bail conditions, he explained. The assessment revealed more than just alcoholism, the psychologist found, concerning personality disorder traits that might explain her fixation on your son. "What does that mean for us?" I asked. "The court has ordered her to undergo dual treatment, both for alcohol addiction and for her mental health issues. It's actually a good thing. She'll get more comprehensive monitoring than just for the drinking." I felt a strange mix of emotions at this news. On one hand, it was validating to hear professionals confirm what we'd suspected, that Megan's issues went deeper than just alcohol. On the other hand, a diagnosis didn't undo the trauma she'd caused or guarantee she'd actually improve. About a month into Megan's court-mandated treatment, we received a formal letter from her therapist. They were requesting a supervised family session as part of her treatment plan. The letter emphasized that our participation was entirely voluntary and would only occur in a controlled therapeutic environment. David and I discussed it with our own therapist, Dr. William, who we'd continued seeing through video sessions. I'd advise against it at this early stage. He said, "Megan needs to show sustained progress in her individual therapy before family involvement would be beneficial. And even then, I'd recommend starting with just you two adults, not including Jackson." We sent a polite but firm response, declining the invitation, explaining that we weren't ready for direct contact. To our surprise, the therapist responded with understanding, saying they would continue working with Megan individually and might reach out again in the future, if appropriate. Around this time, my parents made another attempt at reconciliation. My father called David's cell phone, knowing I probably wouldn't answer if they tried me directly. "Please, just listen," Dad said when David reluctantly put him on speaker. "Your mother and I have been doing a lot of thinking. We spoke with Megan's doctors, too. We understand now that we've been enabling her behavior for years, making excuses instead of holding her accountable." "That's great, but it's a little late," I replied, not bothering to hide the bitterness in my voice. "We know," Mom chimed in, apparently also on the call. "We failed both our daughters. We failed you by not protecting you from her behavior. And we failed her by not getting her help sooner. But she is truly changing this time. The doctors say her progress is remarkable." I sighed, exhausted by the cycle of hope and disappointment. Even if that's true, protecting Jackson comes before anyone's feelings, including yours, including hers, and including mine. There was silence on the other end. Then my father's voice, softer now. "We understand that. For the first time, I think we really do. I didn't make any promises, but I did agree to let them continue receiving updates about Jackson through email and photos. It was a small concession that cost me nothing, but might help rebuild some kind of relationship eventually. Still, I made it clear that any information shared with Megan would result in immediate cutting of communication again." 6 months passed with relative calm. According to reports from her treatment facility, Megan was complying with all requirements. She attended therapy sessions, maintained sobriety, verified by testing, and hadn't violated the restraining order or monitoring conditions. We gradually settled into a new normal, eventually returning to our own home after installing a comprehensive security system that would make a bank vault jealous. Then, a formally worded letter arrived, delivered through her therapist, as allowed by the court. In it, Megan acknowledged her actions without excuses or manipulation. She expressed remorse for endangering Jackson and for the subsequent stalking behavior. She didn't ask for forgiveness or access to Jackson, just acknowledged the harm she had caused and her commitment to recovery. I read it several times, analyzing every word for hidden manipulation or guilt trips. Finding none, I showed it to David. "What do you think?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "It seems genuine, but we've been fooled before. I'm not ready to respond, but I won't throw it away either." We decided to acknowledge receipt of the letter through her therapist, but maintained our position that direct contact wasn't currently on the table. The therapist continued sending occasional updates, all indicating significant improvements in both Megan's sobriety and understanding of boundaries. I remained cautious, insisting on concrete evidence of change over an extended period before considering any kind of reconciliation. We agreed to receive updates, but refused direct contact until she demonstrated at least 1 year of stability. It was a hard line, but one David fully supported. Some family members called us stubborn, but they hadn't lived through what we had. 14 months after Megan's arrest, her therapist reached out again, proposing a carefully controlled meeting in their office. The idea sent me into an anxiety spiral. Despite all evidence of Megan's progress, the thought of facing her brought back all the fear and trauma. David suggested a compromise. What about a video session first? That way, we could disconnect immediately if things went south. It seemed like a reasonable middle ground. We scheduled the session for the following week, with her therapist moderating and our therapist Dr. William joining to support us. When Megan's face appeared on the screen, I was struck by how different she looked. Her complexion was clearer, her eyes brighter and more focused. The slightly bloated appearance that comes with heavy drinking was gone. She seemed genuinely transformed. "Thank you for agreeing to this," she began. "I know it couldn't have been an easy decision." For the next hour, she spoke candidly about her recovery journey. She acknowledged the harm she'd caused without excuses, taking full responsibility for her actions. She talked about the work she'd done to understand the roots of her alcoholism and her unhealthy fixation on Jackson. "I was trying to fill an emptiness inside me," she explained. "When you got pregnant, I convinced myself being an aunt would give me purpose. Then, when you rightfully kept me away after what I did, that obsession just grew." I listened silently, monitoring my own emotional reactions while trying to assess her sincerity. "I hope someday I can be an aunt to Jackson, in whatever capacity you deem appropriate," she said toward the end of the session. "But I understand that may never happen, and that's a consequence of my actions that I have to accept." That comment triggered my protective instincts. "I appreciate your progress," I said carefully, "but I need to be very clear. Access to my child is not on the table in any foreseeable future. Any relationship we might rebuild would be between us as sisters only." To my surprise, she nodded without argument. "I understand completely. That's a totally reasonable boundary." After several more video sessions over the course of 2 months, we cautiously agreed to an in-person meeting at her therapist's office. When Megan arrived, she was carrying a gift bag. "This is for Jackson," she said, holding it out. I immediately stiffened, thinking of the wine-soaked clothes from before. "We discussed no gifts," I reminded her. "You're right. I'm sorry." She set the bag aside without protest. Old habits. I should have respected that boundary. The fact that she accepted this correction without defensiveness was actually more convincing than any apology could have been. Throughout the session, she remained focused on making amends to me and David, rather than trying to establish any connection to Jackson. When my parents learned we were having these meetings, they immediately started pressuring us to accelerate the reconciliation process. "It's been almost 2 years," my mother argued during a phone call. "Megan's done everything the courts and doctors have asked. Don't you think it's time to be a family again?" "No," I said firmly. "Rebuilding trust takes years, not months. The fact that you're trying to rush this shows you still don't fully understand the situation." That shut down the conversation quickly. Over time, my parents learned that pushing only resulted in us pulling back further. They eventually accepted our timeline, even if they didn't fully understand it. By the 2-year mark of Megan's recovery, we had established a cautious, distant relationship. She attended occasional family gatherings where Jackson was present, but under strict conditions. She remained completely sober, and was never alone with him. She accepted these limitations without complaint, seeming to understand they were the natural consequences of her past actions. Meanwhile, I continued my own therapy, working through the trauma and hypervigilance that still affected me. I jumped at unexpected noises, and still checked the locks multiple times each night. I struggled with anxiety whenever Megan was in the same room as Jackson, watching her every movement like a hawk. Dr. William assured me these reactions were normal given what we'd experienced, and would likely ease with time and continued safety. You're not obligated to trust someone who has given you reason not to, he reminded me. Trust is earned, not owed. That perspective helped me navigate the complicated feelings that arose as Megan continued to demonstrate change. I was learning to trust my instincts while allowing for the possibility of measured reconciliation. When Jackson turned 4, we held a small birthday party at a local park. Family and a few friends attended, including Megan, who now had nearly 3 years of sobriety. She brought a modest gift that she first showed to me for approval. A picture book about dinosaurs, Jackson's current obsession. During the party, I noticed Megan step away from the group, sitting alone on a bench at the edge of the playground. I hesitated, then decided to join her. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just taking a moment," she said. "These gatherings can still be triggering, sometimes being around people who are drinking. I mean, I hadn't even thought about that. Several adults were having beer or wine with the pizza. Do you need to leave? We'd understand." She shook her head. "No, I've got coping strategies now. I wanted to tell you something, actually. Today marks 3 years sober for me." "Congratulations," I said, genuinely impressed by the milestone. "I don't want to make a big deal about it," she continued. "It's not why I mentioned it. I just wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For maintaining your boundaries. If you had given in when I was manipulating everyone, if you had allowed me back into your life easily, I probably wouldn't have gotten the help I needed. Your refusal to accept my behavior forced me to actually confront my issues." I didn't know what to say to that. After a moment, I simply nodded and said, "I'm glad you're doing better." As I walked back to the party, I realized we had found a new equilibrium. Not the close sisterhood I might have dreamed of as a child, but a carefully managed relationship built on hard-earned respect. Jackson's safety and well-being remained the non-negotiable priority, but there was room now for cautious interaction. Last week, Megan celebrated 4 years of sobriety. She moved to a neighboring town for a job in addiction counseling, using her experience to help others. She maintains appropriate boundaries, always checking before sending gifts for Jackson's birthdays and holidays. She never asks for unsupervised time with him and respects our parenting decisions without question. Sometimes I catch myself watching her interact with Jackson during family gatherings, him showing her his latest Lego creation, her responding with appropriate interest. In those moments, I feel a complex mix of emotions, lingering weariness, sadness for what might have been in a different reality, but also a measured appreciation for the work she's done to change. Jackson knows a simplified version of our history. We explained that Auntie Megan was very sick when he was a baby and made some bad choices that meant she couldn't see him for a long time. He accepts this with the straightforward logic of children, neither particularly attached to her nor afraid of her. As for me, I've come to accept that some wounds never fully heal. I doubt I'll ever completely relax when Megan is around Jackson. I'll probably always have that instinctive urge to move closer when she interacts with him. But the acute fear has subsided, replaced by a vigilant caution that feels manageable. David and I recently discussed having another child. The conversation brought up unexpected anxiety for me. Memories of those terrifying days with Jackson flooded back. But David gently reminded me that we're not the same people we were then. We're stronger, more prepared, with boundaries firmly in place. "We can't let fear of what happened in the past stop us from building our future," he said, holding my hand across the kitchen table. He's right. Of course, the best revenge against trauma is to not let it control your life forever. We're moving forward cautiously, but deliberately, holding our boundaries firm while allowing for the possibility of growth and change. I still have the letter Megan sent from treatment all those years ago. I keep it as a reminder of how far we've all come, but also as evidence should we ever need it again. Trust, once broken, is never quite the same. But life continues, and families evolve. Ours certainly looks different than I ever imagined, shaped by crisis and painful reckonings, but ultimately stronger for having weathered the storm. Sometimes people ask if I've forgiven my sister. That's a complicated question without a simple answer. I've accepted the reality of our relationship as it exists now. I've acknowledged her work toward change, but forgiveness implies forgetting. And as a mother, I can never forget. Instead, I found something more practical and sustainable. A cautious peace built on clear expectations and demonstrated behavior rather than promises or obligations. That's the thing about real life. It rarely wraps up with neat bows and perfect resolutions. Sometimes the best ending isn't reconciliation, but a clearer understanding of necessary boundaries. Sometimes heroism looks like simply protecting your child day after day from whatever threats may come, even when those threats come from people who should have loved them. If there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's to trust my instincts as a mother. I knew my sister had problems, but I allowed social pressure and family expectations to override my better judgment. Never again. My son's safety will always come first, regardless of who might be offended by the boundaries we set. For those facing similar situations with family members who endanger your children, my advice is simple. You don't owe anyone access to your child. Not parents, not siblings, not anyone. A relationship with your child is a privilege, not a right. And those who violate your trust with something as precious as your child's safety forfeit that privilege potentially forever. As for my sister, I hope her recovery continues. I hope she finds fulfillment in her work helping others overcome addiction. I hope the growth she's shown is genuine and lasting, but my priority remains unchanged. Protecting my family, maintaining appropriate boundaries, and creating a safe, stable environment for my son to grow up in. That's not a fairy tale ending, but it's a real one. And in the messy, complicated world of family dynamics and addiction, reality is all we have to work.